Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ya ayyuhal muslimun. To the long-time listener and first-time visitor, we welcome you to this episode. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Alhamdulillah, hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih, kama yuhibbu rabbuna wa yarda. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله الناصح الأمين اللهم صل على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد يا عباد الله الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام والسنة. All praise and thanks belong to Allah for guiding us to Islam and for guiding us to the Sunnah. Applied knowledge is power. Bidnillahi ta'ala, perhaps one day we'll speak about that in more depth and in more detail. However, just to know something and not act upon it, it's not going to benefit us. But if we know something and then we act upon it, we apply that knowledge, that's what's going to benefit us, bidnillahi ta'ala. From the greatest things that an individual needs in their life is that they have to have a connection with their Lord Azza wa Jal. There have to be individuals who keep their tongues moist with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it also must be of individuals who are constantly asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because there are many things that we will need in life. From those things that will benefit us in the hereafter. And of course, this should take up the greatest portion of our supplications, is that we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those things that are going to benefit us in the hereafter. So when we get an opportunity to make dua unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to make sure that we are asking for those things that are going to benefit us in the hereafter. Now, but with that being said, it is also encouraged to ask for those things that are going to benefit us here in the dunya. So we have to know, and we should make it our business to know, what times are the supplication more likely to be accepted? What times are the supplications more likely to be accepted? Because if we know those times, then we can take full advantage of those times. Bithnillahi ta'ala. There comes a hadith on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that has been collected by Imam Muslim in his collection of authentic hadith, in his Sahih, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in this hadith is a hadith an Abi Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أقرب ما يكون العبد, that the time where the servant is the closest من ربه, is the closest to his Lord, is where? وهو ساجد, is when he is prostrating inside of the prayer. Now, is when he is prostrating inside of the prayer. So what are the benefits and the takeaways from this time frame? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he commanded us, he said, فَأَكْثِرُوا, so make a lot of what? At this time, when you are in prostration, when you are closest to your Lord, Jalla wa'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, فَأَكْثِرُوا الدُّعَاء, so make a lot of dua, increase in making dua. This is the time to ask and ask and ask and ask and ask. This is the time. Why? Because this is the time where the abd is the closest to his Lord, Jalla wa'ala. Naam. So let us take advantage of this, bithnillahi ta'ala. There are other times as well where the dua is more likely to be accepted. Naam. And we're not going to mention all of them. We're just going to mention two. We already mentioned one, and that is when the person is prostrating inside of the salah, then this is the time where he is the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he commanded us to increase in supplications. This is the time to increase in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those things that we need here in this dunya and those things that we need there in the hereafter. Naam, this is the time to ask Allah ta'ala for Jannah, to ask Allah Ta'ala to protect us from the fire, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our reckoning, our account easy on the day of judgment, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our speed in which we travel across the bridge the fastest speed possible. This is the time where we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those things that we need here in this dunya. Naam, this is the time. There comes another hadith an Anas radiyallahu ta'ala anhu فيما رواه الترمذي, where the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and this rawahu at-Tirmidhi wa sahahahu al-Albani, naam, where the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, ad-du'a bain al-adhan wal-iqamah, that the dua between the adhan and between the iqamah, la yurad, it is not rejected. Naam, that the dua between the adhan and between the iqamah, is not rejected. This is very important for us to know, because how often is it that we do not capitalize on this time frame? And this is the reason why I wanted to just look at these two times in particular, when a person is in sujood and between the adhan and between the iqamah. Why? Because these are times where we often neglect to take full advantage of them. Okay? How often is it the case where an individual is in the masjid, or an individual, let's say they're outside in a gathering, the park, whatever, and someone calls the adhan. Naam. But after the adhan is called, what happens? People go back to talking. They go back to talking, lollygagging, continuing conversations, and so on and so forth. Naam. Not capitalizing on this time to what? To beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we are in the park, for example, let's say the Muslims have gathered and we're inside the park, and then the adhan is called, and then the iqamah is called sometime after that, a few minutes or what have you. Those few minutes between the two should be periods where you hear much silence. Why? Because people should be making dua and begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during this time. As far as the socialization, we have plenty of time for that after the salah. Likewise, inside of the masajid, how often is it inside of the masjid where the adhan is called, and then the people, they just go back to talking and continuing their conversations and so on and so forth? This is the time to beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is important that we put everything in its proper place. There's a time for this, there's a time for that. The time for talking is not now. It's not between the adhan and iqamah. The time for talking is after the salah, inshallah ta'ala. The time for socialization is not between the adhan and iqamah. The time for socialization, that's after the salah, bithnillahi ta'ala. The time between the adhan and the iqamah is time for what? It's for begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the time to beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the time where those things that we need, we're asking for. This is the time where those things that we're scared of, then we're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate us from them and to save us from those things. This is the time where if anything is going wrong, we're sick, we're not feeling well, so on and so forth, then we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure us. This is the time where we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cure our family members who are suffering from ailments. This is the time that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid our family members who are in need of assistance, so on and so forth. This is the time to beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not the time for socializing. So it's important for us to understand and to know that as relates to dua, there are time frames, there are awqat. The ulama, they mention awqat turja fiha al-ijaba. There are times where we anticipate and we hope that the dua will be answered. Why? Because these are times where if you make dua in this time, it's more likely to be answered. So we have to take advantage of those time frames, bithnillahi ta'ala. And how do we take advantage of these time frames? Is that we make an abundance of dua during those times, inshallah ta'ala. So it is incumbent upon the Muslims that we take full advantage and we work very diligently in taking advantage of these times and trying to reap the reward of this time by increasing in dua, increasing in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those things that we need, increasing in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to save us from those things that we are scared of. This is the time where we should strive very hard to beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the best of our abilities. Because if we were to apply this knowledge during this time, then that's power. إلى اللقاء. استودعكم الله والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.